I've been a Democrat all my life. My father was the chairman of the Democratic City Committee at a time when the Republicans controlled the state and controlled the city. So my tradition as a Democrat, I think, is unequal. And this is the first time in my life I have ever endorsed a Republican candidate. So let's get that at the beginning. And as President Kennedy said, and by the way, I want to identify myself as a John F. Kennedy Democrat. And as a matter of fact, if you went back and looked at even his inaugural speech, where asked not what your country can do for you, which seems to be what is really that's happening now. What can my country do for me? He says, no, what can you do for your country? And that's where I started in politics, and I've never been able to get beyond that. And so I'm a proud John F. Kennedy Democrat, and I find myself today as a growing number of Scott Brown Democrats. You've heard of Reagan Democrats? Well, here in Massachusetts, we're going to have Scott Brown Democrats from North Adams to Provincetown. And I've got a couple of special reasons for that. I don't do it blithely, I don't do it foolishly, I do it after a lot of sober thought. And I am distraught as a senior citizen and as a man who has loved government and loved politics since he got out of high school, to see what's happening to our country. And this country isn't going to do very well if its leaders are paralyzed. And you know and I know and everybody's fed up to hear that they're paralyzed. They can't talk to each other. All they can do is line up on either side of the room and talk to themselves and then throw spitballs and worse at each other. And how we're going to come out of our difficulties, if that's the national leadership, I don't know. And so I worry about the future. I'm near the finish line, but my kids and my grandchildren aren't. And I worry about them and your kids and grandchildren too. Because we've got a lot of unfinished business, and we can't get it done if they spend time demonizing each other. And in this kind of environment, there's only one guy that I can see who's had the courage and the guts to come out and to stand in the middle and to take the missiles from both sides, and that's Scott Brown. This is a unique and almost peculiar kind of courage in a field where there usually isn't a hell of a lot of courage. Because everybody is pointing for the next election. Hey, I got to get back here. I got to get elected. I've been here 20 years, but I want to be here 40 years. That's the mindset. And so they're afraid to come out of their cocoon. They're afraid to take one baby step forward to say that we should do something for the good of the country rather than for the good of myself because I want to stay in office. And so as I get older, I get more and more fed up with the timidity of both parties, with the timidity of both leaderships, with the expectation of leaderships that men like Scott Brown are supposed to placidly follow along and do their bidding. And what makes them so smart? And why should we rely on them because they've gotten us into this mess together? And so to have a glimmer of hope, a candle in a dark room, of some guy who's willing to step forward and to do what nobody ever thought, no politician in his right mind would do what he's doing because of the fact that how can you win? You can only win if you protect your flank, if you don't get accused by the purists of being a traitor. It was a very, very difficult thing. And as I've sat as a citizen and I've read back and forth for a couple of years about a person I never knew until the last 2 or 3 weeks of his first campaign, and only then by reading about it in the paper, I have been astounded by his courage, his foresight, his vision. And I say to you, if we're going to get out of this mess, it's only going to be through the leadership of Scott Brown and not all of these fellows who are all hanging together and bemoaning him and bemoaning the threat he is, because the name of the game in politics to both parties is control. Control, control, control. And the Democrats in Massachusetts have controlled the Senate since Ed Brooke left some 35 years ago. They've controlled the House for as long as I can remember. They've controlled the legislature on a 10-to-1 basis. But that's not enough. And this is a dangerous guy, because he's coming along preaching a message that is responsive to people. He's saying, for crying out loud, I'm working for you. This isn't Ted Kennedy's seat, it's the people's seat. This is a new man, a new phenomenon. And the name of the game in politics to the leadership is, if you can't control them, exterminate them. And so what you're seeing now is they accuse him of being part of the war on women. Give me a break. I've got this book because I read it Sunday night, and I read about a 6-year-old boy defending his mother at the risk of his life to an abusive second husband. An 18-year-old kid in college coming over to protect his sister, 6 years younger, and his mother from another abusive husband, certainly at the risk of his life. That last situation was horrific, horrific. And he's a war on women? Let's get these things straight when you say things. What's war mean to you? War means shoot to kill. War means napalm. War means annihilate. War means exterminate. War means unconditional surrender. What are we talking about? How did that get into our vocabulary? What's going on here? This man happily married 2 beautiful daughters. A war on women. Does that mean that he's on war against his own wife, his own children? It is idiotic. It's beneath dignity. And then when the leader of the party tries to challenge his masculinity, calling him an honorary girl because he folded sheets, I'm all mixed up. But are we for women or are we not for women? Do we see something sissified in being part of the household chores? Or isn't that what any halfway decent husband knows he's got an obligation to do? How does that get into the scene? With not only the chairman of the state committee saying it, but Mrs. Warren hopping on and saying, yeah, she didn't think she'd be folding any sheets in the future. Well, come on. We're talking about a country that can't pay its debts, that is going up $1.3 trillion every single year, that can't honor its promises, that can't do things straight, can't run a 3-car funeral. And all of a sudden we're talking about folding sheets like that's a legitimate issue in a campaign for the United States Senate. So I'm here because of the fact I see in him not only something new, something brave, but I see in him the last best chance of bringing this country to its senses, where they sit down like you and I could sit down. Hey, we could straighten out in about an hour and a half with a couple of free cups of coffee. We could straighten out, we know that the deficit thing we've got to stop spending so much. We know there's got to be some taxes. We know these things have got to happen. But these guys are so busy demonizing each other, they can't get to it. So I think we have a unique man who I hope stays in the Senate as long as he wants to stay there. Because I think the Senate without him really says that there will be no more Scott Browns. If you pay the price of your job and your service to public service because of the fact that you have dared identify yourself as a Republican, even though you voted with them only 54% of the time, that says that you aren't allowed the slightest bit of independence. That's going to be the message. And so if we want more Scott Browns in the United States Senate and the United States Congress, then this guy has got to go back not only with a victory, but a resounding victory. And I am proud to be a Scott Brown Republican. I am proud to be a supporter of this man.